What's up, everyone? Long time no see on this channel. Well, you guys have been getting some little clippets of me, but I haven't sat down in a while. I'm not sure when the last time I sat down to make this type of video was, but it's been a while. Okay. And so recently I posted a question for you guys. I just asked what it is that you guys want to explore together. And there was kind of a theme I was noticing. Even though some of the questions seemed very unrelated, I definitely felt there was a common thread, a common underlying theme that I was picking up on. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to end up calling this video or the direction overall that this is going, but there were definitely some things. I feel like I can tackle all aspects and address most of those questions within this one video and it not seem like completely all over the place, because again, there was a common theme. So the questions that came through for this Q&A was not getting sucked into the narrative, trusting yourself was something that came up for me, and I'll get into a story with how that was mine, trusting yourself, like this whole idea of trusting ourselves. Grounding insights, how to ground insights that you get from spirit, and then connecting with your future self, which you can probably already feel like how those kind of might all, kind of be existing in the same thing. Essentially, this is just going to be a Dharma talk, which I guess is kind of everything. Most things that I address on this channel have to do with Dharma and just about, this sense and this idea and the experience of relaxing into your purpose and why you're here. And so I feel like a really cool gateway into this will be starting off with kind of just like a little bit of an anecdote or story time. I know some of y'all really love these story times, and just I know I get a lot when teachers and people, just other beings I'm sharing this journey with, just share about just like how they interact with the world. I feel like I learn more through that than anything else, because it's just like you just really see how we're all going through the same shit, right? Just this human experience. Which is also reminds me of like kind of a disclaimer that I just want to say, is that like I in no way come at my channel or anything that I make from this idea that I know any better than anyone. I just am explaining what I've learned, or just sharing what has set me free to a certain extent from being an individual that was very shy and very soft-spoken, and someone that was very scared to be who they are and share who they are. Being someone that felt very closed off to a certain degree of intimacy, and having walked around with a degree of trauma and PTSD and social anxiety, to someone that I feel very, very, very free, very appreciative of that version of myself that I was. But I feel like, our best teachers are beings that have, gone through that process of transmutation and can kind of walk us through that. And I've definitely been those versions, right? It's, kind of like the underdog. That's why I will forever have a heart for the underdog and those people that probably don't have many people that believe in them. Or maybe there were a few wise beings along your path, like there have been on my path, that saw something beyond this kind of scattered consciousness that can be created through, just taking a human birth, a human incarnation. There was definitely some wise beings that kind of validated this sensation within me, that despite what was on the surface and all this stuff, the density that I had accumulated through taking human incarnation, through generational karma, through, upbringing, childhood, the soul's blueprint, all of those things that are very necessary and foundational within the early incarnation. I'm very grateful for those beings that were able to validate and confirm this level of depth and potency and purpose behind me. That's behind each and every single one of you that is drawn to this video today. So I in no way am like coming at this from I know better than anyone. This is just coming from one cosmic sibling to another, sharing a journey. Just, that's what satsang really is, just sharing our perspective, our experience with how we have set ourselves free, how we can enjoy the human incarnation, with as least limitation as possible. And that doesn't necessarily mean, the spiritual communities, I feel like, it's almost like they can kind of sell you a dream, right? It's like you can be sold this dream, at least in the beginning, that, you know, through law of attraction or really focusing your thoughts and really concentrating on your thoughts and just being very focused on the realm of mind, you know, we can almost be sold a dream that your life is going to be a fairy tale. It's going to be happily ever after. And while you most certainly can experience a degree of freedom and transcendence from everything that happens within this human experience, you only do so because you're extracting your sense of identity from those comings and goings. It doesn't necessarily mean those comings and goings are not going to happen. They're not going to occur. And so I feel like anyone that is trying to convince you otherwise is either trying to convince themselves that fact, or they're trying to sell you something, you know, and there's, you know, no shame in their game. Like, that's whatever. I don't know what they're here to explore, right? So I'm not coming at this from like a teacher or guru, you know, I'm just like sharing from one entity to another who has gone from a sense of deep limitation and self-consciousness and just like feeling so contracted to someone that feels very free and very liberated and very bold, like very surprised sometimes by my own self in a good way. And so, you know, you can't help but want to share that with other people. So that's just also kind of just like karmically keeping myself in check, right? And just taking myself off the hook because, you know, this is to each their own. This is your own experience, your own incarnation. I don't know why you took birth or what the intricacies were, and just like how much you're here to explore for yourself and how much you're here more for the upliftment of other people, you know, how much of that bodhisattvic vow has kind of taken over. But you were drawn to this for a reason. So I kind of want to segue into that story, that anecdote that I had, because I posted a video. You know, I've been trying new things on my TikTok channel, and I posted a short video about parenting and how it's essential that parents learn to trust themselves, right? And that you can trust yourself, you can trust how you're guided to raise your kid, you can trust what feels natural for you and that kind of stuff. And there were a lot of people that I feel like needed it, and it got to those hearts and those individuals. And then there were I had one person just like blow up on me. Like, in this moment, I became dude's mother. He said, fuck mother's intuition, because that's how I opened it with, like, you know, mother's intuition is essentially you know, that's like your higher selves are deeply connected. That's a really deep, significant soul contract. And so there's a lot of communication happening, even down to like your name, right? We think that the mom chooses the name. No, the reason why some feel right and some don't feel right, why is that? Is because there's a name and a frequential bandwidth that feels right for that child, that for that soul and their soul's expression. And so the mom is just kind of tuning into that, or sometimes other relatives can be more receptive to that, whatever, right? So anyways, I was that dude's mom in a moment, in a hot fucking second, and he essentially just started coming at me and just using very vulgar language, whatever. But it's just like the F you and the, you know, that kind of thing projected in that way. I am a firm believer in a properly placed F-bomb, but not when it's like projected at someone with such volatility, you know what I mean? And so, and then that was the first case where I was like, ooh, okay, definitely this is one of those things that there's a lot of sensitivity around the subject. And some other people came in and were like, oh yeah, you know, people can trust themselves only if they're healthy. Right? Only if they're healthy. This applies only if you're healthy within yourself. And so it really got me thinking, right? And it really got me thinking. And I feel like this all kind of has to do moving beyond the narrative, trusting yourself, grounding insights, you know, connecting with your future self. This all comes back to the same root thing. This all comes back to the same core lesson, I guess, or there's just a very significant theme within all of this. There's a lot of layers to these things, right? And so, again, this is where it becomes interesting as teachers or guides or people that are guided to explain these types of things, like someone who has a lot of Mercury in their birth chart, astrological chart, whether you're looking at sidereal or tropical. Mercury is a very powerful component in my chart. So naturally, I like to teach, you know, in ninth house placements, Sagittarius placements. Naturally, I like to teach. I'm very philosophical by nature. I like to break these things down. It's a big part of what my incarnation is all about. So there's a lot of different layers and levels you can look at this from. And so in terms of really following your passion, in terms of really following your heart, I mean, you guys, like, it's all very simple, and we tend to make things extremely complex, right? And one thing that I notice with a lot of people that I work with on intimate levels is like people want to have that roadmap. People want to have a level of certainty before they do something or before they follow that inspiration. It's like people want to have that level of certainty. And don't get me wrong, like, I read tarot, right? That's one of the things I do to like support myself, and one aspect of my Dharma at this point in time is I read tarot. So I have learned to rely in a certain way on something external to kind of confirm what it is I already know to be true internally, right? And so I feel like there's nothing wrong. I'm not knocking that, but it's just is something that I can't help but notice a certain pattern, right? Over a period of time, I've noticed this pattern of we feel guided to do something, and then we have this like, oh, but it's almost like, you know, it's part of the conditioning. It's part of taking birth. It's part of being incarnate on the planet at this time, is like, there seems to be that, oh, but like, can I be certain that this is for me? Can I be certain that this is my right direction? This is my right path? And what you guys need to understand, or what, you know, I'm inviting you to understand, and what just has proved to be useful for me, and what I've learned over the years of really doing my best to live from the inside out versus the outside in, is it is absolutely a requirement that you discard needing to know where your path is going to lead you. And oftentimes we will have certain pockets. I'm noticing you'll have certain pockets in different timelines where that in that moment it can seem like you can even see when you're in that certain pocket, in that certain timeline, you can think that, okay, I see this is going to be what I'm doing forever. And then, you know, sooner or later life happens and you'll be taken down a certain, like a different way. And so maybe I'll give you guys some examples of how that's looked in my life. So when I really started implementing this and I learned like law of attraction for the first time, I really like was listening to Bashar, Abraham Hicks. There were other teachers that were very much so teaching in accordance with that type of like flavor of consciousness. And so I was really practicing like following my highest excitement in big and small ways, right? Because it's a muscle, you guys. It's something that takes time. It's not like, okay, I, you know, see how my life is very unfulfilling, and I want to be in my dream life. Well, it's like, no, that's where paradigms come to play. Check out my paradigms video if you haven't, because there's a lot of really juicy info that sometimes I look back on and I'm like, what the who was that and come from? Because I still learn from those past clippets that I post, you know, still to this day on TikTok and everything. But there's a lot of really great information there about, you know, just understanding and allowing a natural unfolding, and not like getting too ahead of ourselves in terms of it needing to look a certain way or go on our timeline or in any form of linearity, right? I feel like linearity only exists when you're super plugged into like the kind of matrix way of living, which there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with like living a life where, you know, you're essentially just kind of going with the course of events, like the fated life. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're drawn to this video, it's because you want something more. You want something more fulfilling, something more in flow, something more exciting. The thing about excitement is you're not always going to know where the next corner leads you, or what's around the next bend, right? And so, you know, when I was really following my passion or my excitement in the beginning, it was right after Maya was born, and her father, he was supporting us with, he owned a couple bars with a buddy, and so I didn't need to work, and that was like such a big blessing because I wanted nothing more than to be a stay-at-home mom. I always kind of I've always been very close with my guides from a young age, and so I always kind of knew I was going to have a child when I was younger, and it was going to be under much different circumstances than most people, but I wanted it, and it was perfect for my path and exactly what I needed, and allowed a lot of healing and opening of the heart, because my heart had closed down a lot from some experiences in childhood with my parents and just, you know, bullshit. So ultimately, friends being bullied, etc. So to not get down that too much. So I really was in a space where I could cultivate and awareness around what really lit me up. And at one point, I found a metaphysical community through this crystal shop that was really close to us, and I wanted to learn more about crystals, and I started making jewelry. And there was a point where I was bringing in a lot of money, just like hand drilling crystals and selling stuff on Etsy and learning electroforming and making rings. And so I thought at that point that's what I wanted to do long term. And it ended up shifting. I ended up following my excitement after I had Maya, and her aunt had her daughter, they're cousins, they're like 6 months apart. She started going to these fitness classes, and the way she would talk about this community, it felt good. It felt incredible. It felt like a breath of fresh air going 2 years not having any friends, because I ditched my friends because I had an epiphany of like, oh my God, these aren't people I want my child to be around. They might be great now. Who knows? It's been quite a while. But at that point in time, it was kind of toxic and not the most supportive, not the most soulful. And so I was like, I'd rather not be friends and figure out who I am, because I was, had up to that point in time been running from a lot of density and darkness. And, I had a rebirth experience. And so long story short, she kept talking about this community. You got to go with me. You can take a free class. Took my first class. It kicked my ass. I've been active most of my life, so it was very humbling. I had even been doing Beachbody for like a month online for free, just like on YouTube videos. And I loved it. And so the second class I went to, I actually took with the owner, and she, after that class, talked to me for a little bit, and I was like, okay, she's just being nice, whatever. Ended up chasing me down in the parking lot saying you should be an instructor. And that scared the shit out of me, right? That's absolutely terrified me, but I wanted that. There was a deeper part of me that knew that fear was actually a good thing. That was me intuiting the amount of expansion. So talk about future self timelines. My future self was like, this is your timeline. There was a lot of excitement, but there was also a hell of a lot of fear, especially when you're going when you're going to start tipping the scales in terms of going from living I'm sorry, I'm recovering from a sickness, so I might cough, and I'm sorry if I sound raspy, but I really felt guided to sit down and do this right now, so bear with me. So, oftentimes, again, it's getting out of that mentality that it's going to look seamless. Like, if you were on this path, you're going to have to be okay with it looking messy, you guys. And so, like, in those beginning phases and learning to be a fitness instructor and going through all of that, I went through a deep pocket of just like, man, I remember sometimes just like the thought of myself teaching in front of people. Now it's something that I deeply miss. Like 4 years later that I'm not teaching, I miss it so much. But at that point in time, when I first started doing that, it terrified me. But I knew that fear was like, I knew that I needed to go in that direction, and I knew that was going to grow me to a profound extent. Right? And so there was a point where even in that pocket, I felt like that's where I was going to be for a while. And I was there for a while, for like 3 years, right? But you're learning, your guides are taking you down different avenues, and you're gathering different tools along the way, right? And so again, it's a necessity to release how long you think you're going to be in a relationship for. Relationship to a partner, to a friend, to a lover, to whatever, an organization. And just letting spirit, just, surrendering, participating in the surrender experiment, and just letting spirit have this process of purification on your mind, body, and your soul, right? And so in that period, I really learned what it was to be in my power. I really learned that my voice affected other people. I really learned that I was bold, and I had things in my expression, and I activated a lot of past lifetimes, like wisdom from past lifetimes. I allowed a lot of healing of my throat chakra to happen. It's just really interesting because my throat is burning. I might have to go get some water at some point, but I did a lot of clearing and a lot of healing within that time frame. And then what you begin to notice too is that sometimes, like these containers of safety at some point, sometimes it's like exactly what we need for our healing and our growth, but then at some point these containers of healing and safety, they actually become the cages that we then need to set ourselves free from. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's like this journey, you guys, the dharmic path is really releasing your idea of right and wrong, good or bad, what it means, like failure and success. And it's also important to understand that if you want to be successful, or if you like whatever success means to you and whatever that looks like to you, like you can't be afraid of failure. You can't be afraid of looking bad. It's like we want the end result. We want this fairy tale lifestyle, but we're not, it's like we're afraid of the process that will entail of us. That's the hero's journey. You can't avoid that. You cannot have the cake and eat it too. Or like, you can't expect to have the cake and be able to eat the cake if you like don't have all the ingredients to make the cake, right? And so it's going to be messy. It's going to be like you're face to face with your biggest shadows. You're face to face with your greatest insecurities. You're going to draw out, as you start to shine more, you are going to draw out jealousy in others. You're going to draw out envy in others. You are going to also be jealous. You're also going to be envious when it feels like you are working so hard and people cannot recognize your power and your greatness, right? And there's so many different layers. There's so many different reasons for this. And again, it comes back to not judging after appearances, like not taking your bait, not taking your levels of success or whatever from anything that's happening externally. And again, just letting that process carry you wherever it will, right? And so grounding these insights, so it's a process that if you are attached to an idea that it is going to look good or it's going to not be messy, then I'm sorry, this is not the path you want to go down, because this is going to reveal all aspects of yourselves that you feel are the most worthy and that you feel are the most unworthy. It's going to draw it out of you. Like, that's what the Dharmic path is. There's a reason why it is very much so entangled with the path of purification, right? The Dharmic path is the path where you're uplifting yourself, and so by very nature of you uplifting yourself, you're uplifting others. The Dharmic path is where you're more so focused on service to others versus service to self. And so the best servant there is the servant that is cleared of the most impurities, right? So they're cleared of as much as they can. Again, it's a process. And so it's a process of removing your identification, removing your sense of ego, your sense of small, limited self, what you want, what you think you need, right? So these misperceptions that actually block the divine mind from coming through and working through you, right? So what makes a really good servant, right? What makes a great vessel is the space, right? So if you're clouded with all this debris and all this bullshit and all of these perceptions of where you think you're going, why you think you're going there, why you haven't started, why you should start, why you shouldn't, who's better, whatever, as long as you have that is taking up a hell of a lot of space, right? And so the Dharmic path is one that will quite literally, it's like, it's going to purify you. It's going to draw out your areas where you're selfish. It's going to draw out the areas where you are, just all of these very natural human aspects existing on the planet at this point in time. Right? It's natural. Don't make it anything more or less than what it is. Right? And so, in terms of grounding these things, it's like, it's really just about following what feels good. Right? And also understanding that don't mistake what feels good, what feels right, for meaning comfortable, right? Because when you tune into your brighter timeline, sometimes like when I'm tuning into, or for example, when I was teaching fitness, the thought of me teaching powerful classes and leaving like marks on people to where this day, years later, I still have people reaching out saying how much I was their favorite instructor, and my classes are still up on this online forum. So like I still have people, it's been a while, it's been over a year, but I still have people reach out and be like, you are one of my favorite instructors. Like, I've had people even reach out, like, can you teach me, like, can you be my personal fitness trainer, right? Like, to have that, but to have been at the level of self-worth and confidence to where that was a huge leap. And that I knew it was going to be a lot of work, right? Going through panic attacks in my room before I would go to like a training or something. Like, the idea of speaking in front of people would literally, like, my voice would tremble. The shame and the embarrassment that would come from just that alone, like feeling so nervous, and then having people to witness those moments, like the shame and the embarrassment within itself would be enough to, like, have me in a pit of shame and despair for at least a week. So it's not like, if again, don't let anyone sell you the idea that this is going to be a path that's easy, or that this is going to be something that is not going to leave you on your ass, and not going to leave you, in some cases, feeling absolutely disgusted by yourself and absolutely, Father, why the fuck have you forsaken me? Like, I'm doing what I can. I'm showing up. Why is it so hard? Right? Because that's just part of this human experience. That's literally, from a different level, that's what we signed up for, right? That's the hero's journey, right? But on the other side, I promise you it is so worth it. And there does come to a point, like, it feels very convoluted only in the beginning, right? So we have these questions of, how do I ground insights, or how do I receive messages from my future self? How do I trust myself? It's like, you just have to start walking that path. You can't expect it to be clear before you even, take the first step. Because a lot of the times what you learn too, and, one of the things that I feel really blessed about is that I'm not someone that I will like wait until I'm perfect, or I'll wait. If anything, I probably launch things too soon. But I feel like that's an advantage, because in some cases, I feel like people can want to wait until they're perfect, or because they think that there's already so many people out there doing what they're doing, or there's so many, they just like want this perfect little package. But it's like, a lot of the times I wouldn't have gotten to the state of like deep appreciation of where something is at in my work, or what I have to offer, or whatever, if I had waited. Like, you don't get those insights until you're like already acting, until you're already taking those steps. And so, like, I have, I've had people following my work and just following my journey for some time, just like walking this path with Soul Family as you do. And, it's the most important thing is just where you're coming from, right? And so if you are not doing it, like, I really admire people that don't do something just because they feel like there's this pressure that society has placed on them that they need to be doing something. Like, I commend people that are like, it just doesn't feel right, right? And that's great. Honor that. However, if you are not doing something because you feel like you need to be in a state of perfection, and it's interesting because it's generally the beings that are like older souls and very sensitive empaths that actually have very healing codes about them. It's like this world needs them more than anything, and needs their influence more than anything. And it's like they're the ones that are waiting. Meanwhile, we have these people that are like very confused, very confused individuals that are operating with a lot of veils of forgetfulness, that have no problem just going out and fucking up everyone else's paradigm, right? It's really interesting, really funny. Oh, sorry for the flamingo, but it's really kind of comical, because it's like the beings that actually would make the most amount of positive difference and influence on this planet are the ones that are like, oh no, I'm not quite ready. There's kind of like this shy bashfulness about them in some senses. And it's like, meanwhile, these people that are just like very fucking lost and confused are just like out there not waiting for anything. There's no amount of like true self-reflection there, right? And there's, yeah. So that's one thing. And another aspect of it too is just, not rushing into something. So a lot of the time too, it's like with this needing the whole path to be laid out, it all comes back to honoring a natural unfolding, honoring that process, and understanding that if you're coming from a place, like depending on what type of paradigm you're starting from, and just like how many lifetimes you've had, and what other planetary systems you may or may not have had lifetimes on, that's all going to influence this thing. Like, you have no idea how many lifetimes, when you look at someone who seemed to have achieved success like that, you don't know what's written in their blueprint. You don't know how many lifetimes they've been preparing for something. You don't know what piece of the same puzzle, like, this notion of same mission, just different assignments. You don't know what part of that they were here to play. And so again, it continues to come back to like, judge not after appearances, and just do whatever you're guided to do, and don't worry about the fucking results. That's literally what the entire Bhagavad Gita is based off of, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but just at least in one of the translations that I read that makes sense to my Western mind, it seems to continue to reiterate this notion of a life of service. Just everything that you do, you're doing it because you don't know what else you would be doing. You're playing your role to the most pristine ability that you can, and you're giving it up to God, right? It's that process of purification. You're releasing the fruits of it. right? And just letting yourself be guided from the inside out versus the outside in. And again, it's like being okay with understanding like what that means and how that means, right? And what that looks like. There was a point where I walked up to this couple one day at the park, and I was just like, it felt more in alignment to ask them if they wanted their picture taken together, because they were like, it was a vibe, it was a moment. They were like laying in the grass. They were like really sweet, just kind of like puppy love. And I asked them if they wanted their picture, because it just felt like a really pure, natural interaction. And for me to have walked past and not have said that because I was like nervous of how they would have reacted, then that would have been me in a way shutting down, like closing my heart down to that divine inspiration, right? And even though they said no to the picture, I felt good. It just felt good because, the light in them recognized that light and what I was really communicating with asking them if they wanted their picture taken, because it was so, it was so sweet. And so it's like, when I have people that do ask me questions like, what am I supposed to do? Or what does my future self want? Or what was the other question? Or how do I move beyond the narrative? How do I really trust myself? It really does come back to this moment, right? I read actually a really great passage today in one of my books. It's like the only way we can really have any type of like profound effect on the future is when we're actually present. Because otherwise, essentially, this is me completely paraphrasing, but otherwise, it's essentially when you're not present, when you don't have a level of awareness and your Shakti is being eaten up. So that just means energy, you guys, because I know people have asked what that means. But when your energy, when your vital life force is being sucked into all these other areas, like my Kundalini yoga teacher, for example, he says, one of his teachers says, 1/3 of our life force energy goes to doubt. Excessive doubt. That's a lot of energy. Some degree of energy is necessary, or is not necessary, natural. But 1/3 of it goes to excessive doubt, right? That's the energy you actually need to be present. You need to be present in order to change your narratives, right? And so in order to, and so you're not adopting and just like eating the narratives and the paradigms that are like being influenced to you, or being fed to you. And so you're not influenced by the paradigms of other people, because you're just a really sturdy foundation within yourself, within your own paradigm, within your own foundation, right? And so, a really good teacher, really good guide, I mean, the best teachers that I've ever come across are those beings that will consistently say that you need to trust yourself, right? And going back to that example of the TikTok video, was interesting because that woman was like, well, only people who are healthy should trust themselves. But it's like, again, most of the time when I feel like people are so offended by like, when I say things like there's no such thing as evil, and people are like, well, child sex trafficking and all of this stuff, it's like, that's only seeing something from one incarnation. And there's many different levels. I'm not saying that is something that I condone. I have a child. I'm a mother of a child. I have very strong biases towards that and perceptions, right? And not necessarily perceptions, but perspectives about that. Absolutely. However, I am gifted with enough grace within this incarnation to know that there is something much bigger guiding all of this. Something much more all-encompassing, something much more intelligent than just myself, that I'm not going to pretend like I know what it all means. And I'm not going to pretend like it's not, I'm not going to turn a blind eye. But at the same time, it doesn't understand the complexity that is karma, and the complexity of what it means to take human birth, and the complexity of ironing these things out. Because again, it's like, what suffering really is an inability to accept what's happening now. And it's an over-identification and over-attachment to whatever is happening now, meaning something about you, or meaning something about the truth of all of existence, right? And so even if we can't at the very least agree that this life doesn't end, if we can't at least be on the same page with the fact that we probably have many, 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 many hundreds of thousands of different incarnational experiences, at the very least we can agree that, it's going to end at some point. And that, as long as we're doing our best, which is what kind of the point of that video was, as long as you're really doing your best And as long as, once you know better, you're doing better, you can really trust that everything is going to work out in your favor, right? And that requires a certain degree of peace. That requires a certain degree of presence, right? And so understanding too that all of the flaws, all of your misperceptions, all of the weird behaviors you adopted when you came in, all of those things that those are predicaments that we just find ourselves in, right? Those are just packets of information. They're just part of what is necessary in order to make a human incarnation relevant. And sometimes it's not even our own stuff. Sometimes it's a big part of just the service that we came here, to provide for the planet, is adopting these things and helping to release the stigma around them, helping to release the shame and the judgment around them. And in so doing, we create these etheric pathways. And so we make it easier for other people to see things from a different light, to not overly identify with it, to not overly attach to it, right? And so there's a lot of levels to these things. It's just about trusting, really trusting yourself is trusting that how I am guided to act in this moment, or whatever is arising this moment, as long as I maintain a certain degree of mindfulness around it, and as I do my best to not judge myself, and as I do my best to maintain purity of self, purity of the moment, purity of acknowledging the God in me, and the God in another being, and the God presence that exists in all of my interactions. And I can be sure that whatever's unfolding, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, is karmically exactly what it needs to be, right? And so one of my great teachers right now that I've been tuning into his work a lot, Joel Goldsmith, he often reiterates the fact that, it's not that anyone, God is all there is, right? And so this is kind of where I tend to exist from when I'm giving teachings, but it can really stir people and rub people the wrong way when I say there's no such thing as evil. God is all there is, right? Because then, people are so, it's just way beyond their paradigms sometimes for people to be able to fathom that. And a lot of times people are so shackled to their own shame and their own judgment and their own sense of justice. And a lot of the time they project that onto God anyways, that at that point, God is a human. God is a projection of the human mind and not actually what God is, right? So God is all there is. And so I love the way that Joel Goldsmith explains this. It's all this is God's play. It's God's domain. The only difference between someone who is very obviously has demonstrated spiritual gifts or spiritual abundance or any type of prosperity or any good, true good that is born from the source. The only difference between that person and someone that is very confused, in other words, creating a lot of suffering and illusion and confusion for themselves and people around them, it doesn't mean God is any more or less existing in this person than this person. It's just the degree to the realization of God is different. That's the key. It's the degree to which one has opened their consciousness enough to allow God to come through and work through them. Source, creator, whatever you want to call it. Some people have a weird, distorted relationship to God again because there's been this projecting of man's mind, man's interpretation, just man's mannerisms onto God or onto the creator. Right. And so it's not to say necessarily that anything, you can't do anything wrong. You really can't. And I know it's, this is again coming from someone, I feel like out of everyone saying this, y'all can really trust it coming from me because I've seen some really dark shit. I've been through some really dark shit. Lost a lot of people that I love closely to me, family. I've lost them to some really dark shit. So I feel like for me to be able to say this, I feel like y'all can really trust where I'm coming from here and saying, because it has forced me into that space of really understanding what's going on. It forces you, that suffering forces you to ask these questions, right? And so that's why I'm at a point to where I see how suffering is grace. There is no such thing as evil. These are all components trying to lead you unto yourself. Even these periods where you feel like you don't know what you're doing, you feel like you are selling your soul, you feel like you don't know how to break out of your sense of limitation, see how that's all perfect. See how that's all part of the divine plan. You don't know why karmically, why it's here, and all the different reasons and complexities and the person you're meant to play for other people and just all the moving parts, but you can trust, right? You can trust that there is something much greater guiding you, and that something much greater that's guiding you wants you to open more up to it. right? Because again, the degree that you can be receptive to that God consciousness through meditation, stillness, contemplation, prayer, the degree that you open yourself to that is the degree to which you purify. That's when things start to make more sense. You actually start to speed up your timelines, if that's relevant for you in whatever way. I mean, it's going to look different for everyone, but most certainly, the way that we open ourselves to be receptive to God is through peace and through stillness and through not thinking, from leaving this space. Like if you think of the crown chakra, an imbalance of the crown chakra and the third eye is like being so caught up in the past, being so caught up in the future. It's like perpetuating all of these timelines and all of these things that haven't even happened and that never even happened, or like pulling stories with us from the past and just like perpetuation on and on and on, right? Not really being here, not really being present. And all of our thoughts, all of our scattered consciousness, right? That's not a very conducive place for God to come into. That's not a very welcoming space for God to enter. And, there's a reason why the Bible calls it the still small voice, because if your own thoughts are too loud and too proud, you're not going to be receptive to it. And so there's a degree of quiet that is necessary. And there's also a degree of humility that's necessary, which means don't worry about looking stupid. Don't worry about messing up. I have flopped many, many times, and many of you guys have seen my flops. Many of you guys have seen my journey, and I do my very best to degrees that feels relevant, and where I'm also honoring my own human self and my own need for privacy, my own need for certain areas as I'm still healing. I'm not sharing things before I'm ready to, right? But I do my best to share when I am coming from a level where I do, where there is a degree of peace that has been reached around something, because I am seeing situations more so through the lens of God and less so through my very limited, narrow perception of how Marissa thinks things should have been, right? There's a reason why it's from my will to thy will. Right, and that's also a reason why naturally I didn't really understand why in the past law of attraction techniques just rubbed me the wrong way, and like manifestation and like spell work and get this person to think about you and get your ex to chase you and all this stuff. It just felt like very much so like karmically not okay and not the realms that I wanted to dabble in. And I did dabble a little bit, and I had some pretty interesting things happen. But I understood very quickly that that's not the way to it, because then again, that was me assuming that I know what's best for me and I know what's going to bring me the most amount of freedom, which is ultimately what I want, which is ultimately what our future self is always going to beckon us to, is greater amounts of freedom, right? And so believe it or not, that has very little to do with what's actually happening outside, and very much so to do with a state of consciousness. But there's a catch there, because when your state of consciousness, when you're operating at a certain place internally, because you have allowed more of God to come through and you have allowed more of God to take over your affairs and more of God, source, whatever, creator, to work through you, then you can be sure it's, again, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and then all else shall be added unto you. Right? So it's very simple. That's like the trump all of manifestation skills, is just to be open, is just to be receptive, is just to let God come through and work through you, and not assume that you know what's best, not assume, not be so prideful and caught up that you need to wait to be perfect to do something. And on the other end of the spectrum, you're not rushing into something because, everyone else is doing something, and you feel like you just need to prove yourself. Right, so this is again where you need to trust yourself and just really be honest about where you're at and where you're coming from, because awareness is the first step to any key. The next step, and the most hard step, most challenging step, in my opinion, is accepting yourself, accepting where you're at, and not making it mean anything more or less than what it is. Judging not after by appearances, right? If it changes, it's not true. Whether it's good or bad, if it changes, it's not true, right? That which is true, that which is eternal, is unchanging. And so you're just kind of letting it play itself out, and again, not making it mean more or less anything. And then again, it's knowing yourself, so being aware of where you're at, accepting yourself, and then becoming God. Essentially just like, you're along for the ride. You are the witness. That's what everyone has been talking about, that those beings that you really tune into and you're like, you can feel the amount of peace just tuning into their lectures. You don't care what they are talking about. They could be talking about walking their dog. They could be talking about Joe Schmo from around the blow. I don't know what that means. It doesn't matter what they're talking about, but the place that they're sitting in feels so peaceful. That's what we're seeking. And at the end of the day, it's like, again, just remembering that what is law of attraction? What is it really that we're all wanting? Like, all of us are selfish in the sense that we all want happiness. We all want fulfillment, right? We all want to experience certain degrees of freedom. And where it becomes essential to, again, to be honest with ourselves is like, where are we actually going to achieve that? In my most humble of opinions, it's when, we receive the most amount of upliftment when it becomes less just about our own individual incarnation and much more so about what can I give to other people? How can I add the most value to the most amount of people? By being myself, by just being authentic, by not putting on a show, by not pretending I'm more evolved than I actually am, whatever the fuck that means, right? And by not being ashamed of any part of my journey. And by not assuming that any part of my journey was not as it was supposed to be. And by assuming that, or that anyone else's journey is not as it should be. And I'm guilty of this too, where sometimes I'll say things of like, there's a lot of people out there in the law of attraction communities or in the spiritual communities that are say A, B, C, and D, but I'm coming in to tell you how it really is. It's like, no. I'm so sorry if I've ever been that person, but that is just so distasteful. It's just like, let people be who the fuck they are. Like, this is great. This is a beautiful time. This is the age of Aquarius where we're all sharing. We're all sharing from our different perspectives, different fractalized perspectives of what it means God. We're all just kind of reporting back to each other. This is what allowed me to feel more free. This is what has allowed me to feel more free. That's essentially what we're doing if we're working in the realms of self-help, or when we're guided to be a guide or a teacher, whatever. It's like, essentially, we're just reporting back to each other. This is how I've achieved greater levels of fulfillment. This is how I've achieved deeper levels of peace. Right? And when you're in a more peaceful state, you are naturally going to hear spirit more. That's that still small voice. If you're too scattered, if you're too loud, if you're too worried about fucking it up and getting it wrong, I'm sorry, that is not a conducive state for spirit to come through and work through. If you're worried that you're not healthy enough mentally, if you're worried that you're not perfected enough, I'm sorry, that is not a conducive state. You got to start with where you are. I feel like it's not very it's not very supportive if someone's like, oh, you're not mentally sane enough to be able to trust yourself to be a mom. Who the fuck is anyone to say that? It's like really about, this is a together kind of thing. It's about really giving other people the benefit of the doubt, giving yourself the benefit of the doubt, because how we treat other people is how we treat ourselves. The more that I develop compassion for myself on my journey, it's so much easier for me to be like, okay, that is not my rodeo or my cup of tea, but I honor you. Like, I deeply honor and I respect you, and I who am I to say that I know what's right for you and your path, right? So to really, to wrap this video up, to ground insight, to trust your future self, to drop the narratives of other people, whatever, to really just be in alignment with your dharmic path and to move beyond narratives altogether, it is so essential that you are finding peace as much as you can. You are in a state of peace, that you are becoming a conducive state for God to enter, however you need to do that, right? However you need to calm your nervous system, right? If your nervous system is really scattered, that's not a very welcoming space for God to enter, right? And that's one of the reasons why we have these sayings of being a house divided against itself, right? A house divided against itself cannot stand. That's one of the reasons why you can visualize until you're blue in the face, and at some point those are going to fall apart by the wayside. It's because there's a deeper part of your subconscious that does not feel safe or does not believe what your mind is trying to say, right? Because the mind is faulty. The mind is not a strong foundation to build your life upon. The mind is not a strong foundation at all. The mind is meant to be a servant, if anything. It is meant to be a servant of God and a servant of your Dharma. I'm not here to say that it's negative ultimately, but that should not be where you're placing your sense of value and identity in, right? But eventually you do get to see that, as you do fine tune, as you do calm, as you do engage in practices and things that help you stay peaceful and calm and centered and really do allow you to tune into that divine mind and that still small voice, you start to see the difference between scattered, smaller, limited ego, fearful ego, and divine mind. And then there does come a point where you can't really tell the difference because you've been spending so much time in divine mind that your smaller self kind of just becomes absorbed into that. And that's when you become a house united, right? A house united within yourself. So I hope you guys got something out of this. I kind of feel like I was just rambling, but it feels complete at this point. It's like you just got to start. You just got to go for it. You have to trust when you're meant to move. You have to trust everything has a season. You have to trust when it's time to end, and not making your calling or your Dharma or your destiny, it doesn't look like one thing. Being okay with it changing. There's no such thing as failure. It's going to be messy. That's okay. There's a lot of karmic things that are taking place too. It's going to be a lot harder in the beginning, especially if you haven't been practicing following your intuition and following your highest guidance. It's going to be just like different when you start to make that transition. But I do promise, I can tell you, it gets easier. And there does become a point where you start to feel like you've finally gotten into your groove, right? It feels like you're latched in and you're tuned in, and you really become a force to be reckoned with, because the place you sit in and the place you speak from is not something that's regurgitated. It's coming from the wellspring in your own unique connection, your own impenetrable connection to your soul stream, right? And that's where true trust for yourself and your life comes from. And that's when you're going to be, again, the best vessel, the best service-based individual, and whatever way that's meant to look for you according to your codes, your blueprint, etc. Sometimes for me, and again, it's not always going to look the same, but for the most part, it feels very bold. It feels very passionate. Sometimes I'm sure it can feel scary or angry to people. And sometimes it feels very raw, and it feels very quiet, and it feels very just like contemplative. And, I'm not making it mean any of it. And if anything, I feel like that's, giving people more permission to just like embrace their authenticity, embrace the comings and goings, right? This is all just like the elements, right? It's all just like elements and gunas and life forces and just like all of these different things coming together in order to make this experience what it is. And it's here today and it's gone tomorrow. So like, don't make it mean anything more than what it is. Enjoy what's here, what's now, as much as you can. Like, when you're feeling contracted, know that you're not seeing something through the eyes of the divine mind, and you're seeing something through the eyes of your ego or the eyes of your limited self. And do whatever you can to settle down, to not attach to narratives, to not perpetuate any stories, to let your mind calm down. And again, don't feel rushed into any action until you feel like it has really been born from that still small voice. And it's interesting too, because the more that you do trust yourself, the more that you give other people permission to do that within themselves as well. Believe it or not, it's interesting because this epidemic that we see, like where everyone's kind of against themselves, it comes back to the same root of like, at the end of the day, I feel like people really don't fully trust themselves. Because if you really trusted yourself and you really understood the intricacy of karma and dharma and the soul's blueprint and all of these different, multidimensional factors at play, you understand that what is right for you, like for one entity, you cannot say with 1,000% or 100%, even 50% certainty that could be anywhere near what is right for someone else. And so you just kind of like give other people permission to figure that out for themselves, right? And the more that you trust yourself, the more that because you're trusting God ultimately, because God is your innermost self, and you're making more space. And so give other people permission to do that too, right? But when you're in a world where people don't know how to trust themselves, because this is a planet that the people are very much so easily controlled, because they have lost touch with their God self. They have lost touch with their innermost self. So that makes them more easily to control, right? I mean, there's no conspiracy behind that. That's just what the fuck is happening. I think we can all see that, right? And so, the more that you really do understand these complexities and honor them within yourself, the more you're like, okay, you just let other people do what they do and be their creators. And, that just like, it all creates a feedback loop, right? And at some point, there needs to be that, we need to break that chain, that feedback loop, that chain of reactivity that suggests that anything is not as it's meant to be. And as long as we are in a state of like resisting, it's this weird dichotomy. It's a very delicate dance, you guys. I don't mean to oversimplify it. It definitely is a very delicate dance, because it's like that journey of evolution and involution, where it's like God is pulling you to it, right? God is pulling you to evolve and to become better and to purify. But at the same time, it's like you can't deny any aspect of the journey. You can't shame or belittle any aspect of it, because that's born from God, right? It's all one light. And from there is just like different fractals and distortions, right? So what confusion essentially is someone that is operating under a lot of veils of illusion and can't doesn't know how to get past it. And so of course they're going to create suffering for other people. They're not operating from clarity. They're operating from confusion, right? And so the more that you can calm and still and quiet and not rush and honor the process, honor yourself, you invite clarity. Right, it's like when you see a still, like a pond, like think of confusion, or think of like, I got to do something as like dirtying up the pond, like moving the water around, right? But when you give everything permission to settle down, things make sense. It's like, it doesn't mean the mud's not there, it's still there, but it makes sense. It's put in its proper context, right? So I hope this brought something, clarity, confirmation, peace to your heart today, you guys. If it did, please comment down below. I want to know what you guys got out of this. If you're left with any more questions, if this kind of, made sense, if this is going to help you feel move closer to achieving your Dharma and, actualizing what it is that you feel like you were here for, please let me know, because I can definitely make follow-up videos to this if it feels like part of your question wasn't answered, or if there's some, some more things that we want to explore together. So blessings on your journey, my friends. I'll see you soon.